I like to say that I try to help people do the same thing where, don't use what your lack of whatever as an excuse to being successful, to trying to do things in a good way, to become a good person, to become a good male, and so on. It's because you didn't have some doesn't mean that you can't become that person that your kids are proud of, that your family's proud of.
This week, I have Kendal Netmaker as a guest. He's an award winning entrepreneur, he's an author, and he's a gifted keynote speaker who's on a mission to empower and to motivate people worldwide by sharing his story that, regardless of where you come from and what your challenges are, you have the power to enact change. He's from Sweetgrass First Nation, and Kendal and his siblings were raised by a single mother. Life wasn't easy for them, growing up on a reserve, surrounded by poverty and few chances for opportunities. Kendal has a natural gift. He's a master storyteller who weaves in his real life experiences into motivating lessons for everyone, and they can use them in their own lives. His heartfelt stories are impactful, and he speaks professionally to thousands of people each year on resilience, leadership, and the power of telling your own story. They are warriors. They're strong, resilient, and determined to make a difference in the world. They come from different cultures and walks of life, but they all share a common purpose: to uplift and empower their communities. Welcome to Meet the Anutin-Kewak, a podcast where we sit down with Indigenous people who are making a positive impact in their communities and beyond. From activists and artists to entrepreneurs and community leaders, these warriors share their wisdom, their experience, and their perspectives on a wide range of topics. Join me as I dive into the diverse and inspiring stories of these remarkable individuals and learn about the challenges they face and the lessons they learned along the way. Welcome to the show, man. It's great to see you. Thanks. Again, I have tons of stuff I want to know, tons of questions from you, but let's just start out with telling everybody a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Dansek, Damskatenawal, Gakio. My name is Kendal Netmaker. I'm from Sweetgrass First Nation. I'm currently residing in Saskatoon. Have a wife, two children. Life's busy, traveling, doing speaking engagements, virtual engagements, and helping others in between that. So it's been quite a journey. We were very fortunate to have success with Nietzsche Gear. We started that over 11 years ago now. And so much has happened in between that time, and even leading up to that point where, we there's so many things that could have gone wrong. That's the best way I can put that. And somehow we were able to make it out, and now we've evolved into other things. And now I'm here with you, Michael, and hopefully answer some of your questions.
That's awesome, man. Well, thanks for joining me. And you just touched on it there with Nietzsche Gear.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit just how that started, or how you came up with that, and where it's at right
Yeah.
now?
Yeah. So that was I'm originally an educator. That's my background, is in education. I was in the ITEP program many years ago in Saskatoon. And my focus was to eventually become a phys ed teacher. I was really into sports back then. I loved to play all types of sports, and it had a big impact on my journey. And so, I've always wanted to find ways to give back. And I thought, phys ed teacher, I could see myself doing that for a long time. So I was very fortunate to get into the ITEP program, and I didn't know I was going to meet my wife there. I didn't know that I was going to start my business out of that while in that program. So aside from taking classes on the weekdays, on the evenings and the weekends, I'd had to learn about business, and I didn't know anything about entrepreneurship, about um, how to write a business plan, all that type of stuff. And so I had to immerse myself and learn by going to live workshops on the evenings, weekends, basically sacrificing my time into putting it all into figuring out how to write a business plan, because a lot of these competitions, they wanted to write you had to write a business plan to compete. And I was always one of the only First Nations. Two, uh, I was always the underdog because I wasn't immersed in that world. All those those youth that were going through these competitions, they were like from commerce, they were from those type of programs. And so I was like this total wild card coming in. And I really think it was our storytelling that really made the impact with when we got to the stages and were able to impact and persuade through storytelling. And that comes from, my background. That's how I was taught growing up. That's how I was spoken to growing up, was through stories. And from our generations, that's how they spoke to us, and that's why we retained our culture that way. So it was a big blessing getting into the competitions of being able to share the story of how we wanted to help our people and so on. And from there, we were able to win some prize money at some of those competitions, and then we were able to invest that into buying more T-shirts, designs, building a website. I invested into screen printing. I learned how to do all that stuff. I was buying software, all this type of stuff that's needed to build a T-shirt brand back then. And so, going through all that and learning to sell, learning the market, it was very challenging because I again I had no mentors that were like me. What I mean by that is there was no other Indigenous entrepreneurs that I could talk to at that time. Like in the last 7 years, there's been a huge shift in that entrepreneurship space, and back then I was one of the only few. I didn't know anyone else that I could call. So being in that environment and in that time, it was very lonely. I guess the journey was very lonely, and I was very lucky. I had my wife to be able to bounce ideas off of, to talk to on the in the evenings. We were raising our 1 year, not even 1 year old son at that time. He was just a little infant at that time, and so it was a very challenging time. And long story short, um, I went 2 feet into that business, and that came at a very critical time where I was having trouble of paying for Pampers or formula or rent and all that type of stuff. And with the support of my wife, I was able to give it everything I had. And from that moment, we grew really quickly. And from that apartment to office to kiosk to store to pop up store, and then building ecom, wholesaling, custom orders, and then it evolved from there. Now I do a lot of speaking engagements. I do a lot of consulting work. I did a lot of business coaching in the past, especially through the pandemic. I did a ton of that. Um, we have an Indigenous youth coaching program where we coach youth all across the country, and that's free for anyone to apply. That's my way of giving back, partnering with Can out in Edmonton. Um, we wrote a book, Driven to Succeed. I think that's how you met me, Michael, was through that book. And so much has happened, right? And it evolved from taking that first leap and also hacking it out. There were so many times I want to quit, fail, um, and there's many times I did fail, and somehow we were able to make it through. And the question you're probably going to ask, Michael, is how did it lead to speaking? Well, sometimes we we try things in our life. We try a career, a path, and we're working hard at it. And sometimes that career doesn't work out. Sometimes that path doesn't work out. You put your time in, you try everything you can, but sometimes that's necessary to open the next door in your life, your purpose, so to speak, what you're really meant to do here. And that's what Nietzsche did for me. I really feel that that's what's opened the door for, and that's what I'm doing now.
Oh man, you touched on so much in there. It's awesome. It's a great story to hear, and I'm glad you pushed through and did that, because so many people, you hit that failure once, twice, three times, and it starts to wear on you, and you give up, right? But hearing people come out of the back end of that so much stronger, so much more resilient, and obviously you're feeling the success of that now, right? And pushing through. So it's pretty awesome to see, man. Um, with all of that, there's a lot in there that I wanted to touch on, but kind of the first one, you said going to those competitions, right? You're kind of the only native, you're the only First Nations that you've seen out there. And I see this a lot now too in my work, working with all the communities and spending a lot of time in the north, is that there's that disconnect, right, from the community, from the traditional ways, from living on a reserve. And then there's this huge disconnect of kind of, I hate saying it that way, but like kind of the real world, or like how things are on the outside. how business is conducted, how I see it a lot in construction, just how work's conducted. And it's a pretty powerful thing to overcome. And it's a tough, that's what I'm really running into right now. Right. And in your travels and your speaking and everywhere you've been, do you see a lot of, do you see anything that can start to bridge those gaps?
Well, thankfully, I'm seeing both worlds where I'm seeing some on reserve, some off reserve. I've coached and worked with both, and so um, sometimes there's an educational gap that we have to do as mentors, as coaches, to educate the awareness of, for example, punctuality, showing up on time, showing up early. I always tell people that always to show up early before everyone gets there if you can. The importance of, when you start a business, the importance of cash flow, investing your money, reinvesting your money. um, Especially when you grow up in poverty, once you see a little bit, you want to spend it. That's the, because you have, when you grow up with that lack mentality, you you assume it's not going to come again, and so when it gets there, you want to use it as fast as you can. So that's something we have to unlearn if we want to grow businesses. And I know that because I was there too. I didn't know how to reinvest and stuff like that. So um, that's the kind of stuff that I have to, when I work with people, I try to show them that. And I try, the importance of branding yourself too as a person. So people will actually pick up your call, want to do business with you, respect you over time. All that stuff is, it's very important. So I think my dog is trying to get some attention here. Don't mind her there, Michael.
It's all good. We're all fighting for attention. Never mind. No, such a good point, man. And I feel that when you say that, it's like, yep, definitely. When as soon as it comes, you want to spend it right away because you just don't see it happening again, right? So, um, I definitely hear that ingrained belief. I guess a little bit about that too, just as part of growing up on a reserve, growing up in community is um, finding that self belief, right? Or finding people to believe in you. And I know through your book, through your stories, you've had a few different mentors along the way. Can you touch on that a little bit and how people have supported you through your coming up?
Yeah, it's again, it's come on both sides of the fence, both sides of the worlds. Where I when I when I do speaking engagements, I talk about the two worlds of that I come from, and many people are living in their own two worlds. They have their home world, which is their world that they know, they grew up with, and then the other world that they're trying to be successful in, which is our careers, our anything we do out in the mainstream. That's a different world. And so where I come from and the world I speak to is the First Nations world, where um, just like your past guest John, we're very similar in ways where we have similar beliefs and whatnot. Ceremony is very important to us, and so that was a foundational part of my upbringing, and um, it's something that I highly respect. And so you know with that, it brings a different type of grounding that I can't explain on here. It's a different way of, I can't even put into words. Um, and when I come into the mainstream and I'm trying to do things out here, I have to explain that I'm walking through a different door. I have to put on a different face. I have to put on almost an alter ego, as they would call it. But it's not. I try not to bring the ego in. It's a different personality. What I mean by that is you have to now market yourself. You have to brand yourself. You have to, um, if you're an entrepreneur, you have to try and make sales. So that means you have to get on the calls. You have to do that type of stuff. You have to send emails, quotes, apply for things. You're putting yourself out there continuously, and in our culture, that's like something that we don't do. And so it's continually putting on. Adapting nonstop. Like it's you're adapting into every time you walk through that door. It's you have to. I walk into the First Nations realm. It's is humble, humility. You don't. You're not better than anyone. You're not. Uh, you are live. You're lucky to be here. I come over here. It's okay. Everyone's fighting for the top. Everyone's fighting to try to get to that top. And so I'm able to see both sides of those fences of where things, where we hurt ourselves in a sense, our um, where we hold ourselves back, if you will. And so I'm very grateful that I had that that upbringing, that came from my uncles who were ceremonial leaders back home. They're no longer here. My grandma, my kokam, also very very spiritual person back then, and taught me a lot growing up. And it's still like that, where I learn from people back home, elders. Now I still work with elders. I still learn from them. They still, I'm trying to grow that area of my life, but also over here I have tons of mentors in this other realm that I talk about, which is the mainstream, where every point I've always tried to hire the best of the best, and that's how I reinvest into myself. I try to hire the best of the best, whether it's in retail in the beginning to now speaking. I've had multiple coaches in the speaking world, um, book writing, all that type of stuff. Like, it's if you don't know how to do it, you go find people. If you read their books, you watch them on YouTube, you go to their uh, take their webinars if they have webinars, stuff like that. Whatever you can to immerse yourself, that's what you do.
Yes, that's a really good point. I really like that one and touch on that with mentors because I preach on that a lot. Of we forget that, right? And a lot of men right now too in the masculinity is just we don't have those hunting tribes anymore. We don't stick together in that way, so we don't have those ideas to bounce off or talk to the older ones that have been there and done that. And most people are willing to share that information as soon as they find someone that's receptive to it, right? And know that they'll listen and take in some of those lessons. I talk a lot about it even with books, right? Reading, you got to read. People put their life out on these books, and for a very little investment, you get to learn a lot of information. And same with YouTube, right? That's where I started, was just listening to a lot of YouTube videos and finding mentors that way. Who would you say was kind of the bigger influences on your life with those mentorships? And like I say, for helping these young people or helping any guys out there to find someone to latch onto a little bit.
Well, in both worlds, in terms of the mentors, I can't name just one. There's so many. And so what I'll say is that, um, from the First Nations worldview, I've had multiple, and I still continue to try to seek multiple, because that's how our worldview is. We all help each other. We're supposed to help each other. And so I continually honor those ones who um, are living, and the ones I acknowledge, the ones who have passed on, the ones that have shared knowledge with me that I still use to this day. And then out here, um, in the speaking world, I've hired, again, there's so many that I've worked with that have either helped me for free, and also the ones I've hired, and I've invested more than the average person in terms of amount to work on this, to work to fast track my journey, in a sense where, um, I don't want to make the same mistakes the person that I'm working with did. What can I learn from that person, right? So, when we're talking about, your the revived couple, like that's a big part of that. Even with that journey, like, there'd be people I would look up to, and find out that their relationships crumbled along their journey. Like, to me, that's scary. I didn't want any of that. So I look at, okay, what are these people doing behind the scenes? What are their habits? What are their how is their relationship with their family, right? So that's important to me, because I that's your foundation. If you can't be happy at home, how can we preach that we're mentors, that we're coaches, right? Everything starts at home. Our belief system starts at home. And sometimes there's things that we grew up through um that we weren't taught about, certain thing that is a healthy way. For example, maybe we went through trauma. Maybe we were taught ignorance about a certain race, about, anything. And I worked all the time with non-indigenous companies, and this is something I have to address all the time, is about, like, racism, ignorance, prolonged racism, unnecessary, all that type of stuff. And I tell people, I said, if you heard something growing up from a parent, from a grandparent, from someone in your lineage, it is also, you have a responsibility to leave it there. You don't have to bring it to this present moment. You don't have to bring it to your kids, your grandkids, because our legacy lives through them. The people that we serve, our children. If we don't have children, then it's the people that we work with every single day. That's part of our legacy, how we impact the world. So I want to learn from people that are successful in both of those worlds, where you're successful out here, but also you're successful in your own world, wherever it is that your home fire, your the people that you're with every single day.
Oh man, that's a great way to put that. And I really like that you touch on relationships and how important that is to everybody, right? And needing that home base. I tell that to people all the time is this home, right? As long as that bubble, as long as this circle is strong, because there's enough stuff from the outside world coming at us, coming to get us. If we have that strong base, we're going to be in such good shape. With that being said, with your relationship, you said you met your wife in school. How what are some other, I guess this would be a good one, like, and pointers and just things that you've noticed in your own relationship on getting through that entrepreneurship? I know you got to work late nights, early mornings, and how you keep that how you try to keep that relationship healthy.
You grow together. That's just the best way I can say it, is that you're in it, you're a team, you're committed to each other. And so everything that you struggle with, you're working through it together in some way. Anything that's a win, that's both of your win. It's not just you or individually, it's both of you winning. Everything that we've accomplished, it's both of us and our family. Whoever supported us is I may be the one receiving it, but it's not me. It's all of us that were able to help make that happen. In the beginning of the journey, I when we're young, we're very immature in our thinking. We're immature with seeing the long term, I guess, if you will, seeing what's like, for example, again, not all of us have two parents. Not all of us have one parent, even someone healthy to ground ourselves onto at a young age. When you're a child, some of us weren't taught how to be parents. So I was fortunate. I had one person to ground myself on. You read my book. I learned talk a lot about my mom in there, and she was someone that struggled and sacrificed for me. And so my success, I owe a lot of that to her, because of she paved a foundation for me to be able to dream, to do things, and to try. And so throughout that time of going through that, I now look at the current situation of being with my wife, and also her sacrifices. You know she sacrificed for me too, so I can go big, so I can make this as big as possible for whoever is looking up to me, for whoever I'm meant to work with, and so on. Because she knows also that my path is very unique, and there's a reason why this has all happened, in a sense where um, I feel like part of that is I'm meant to help more of our people to rise up, to have voices, to become entrepreneurs, to become leaders, and so on. And only way you do that, you need a role model. You need someone you can look up to, say, man, I want to do something like that. I would love to do something like that. And someone you could see yourself like. So I feel like that's part of my path, is I was meant to be not only an entrepreneur, but also a speaker, an author. I'll do all these things, and also pass that torch down to other people as much as I possibly can. If there's someone that I know is really hungry, and they really want to do something really good with their life, I'll try help that person. But they have to have that, and not everyone has that. Not everyone comes to me with that. So people, that's a different level. It's like John, for example. We talked about John. John has that. He has that fire. He has that thirst for success, if you will. And so you can't just you have to grow through that. That comes from how you were raised. That comes from everything you've overcome. Usually the best entrepreneurs, the best leaders have overcome the most. They built themselves up to prepare for pressure in the future. And that is something you have to live through. You can't just, take someone from privilege and say, here's your stuff. Go do this. They're not going to have that same fire. That comes from That's where the source of waking up in the morning, staying up late to work on a business comes from. That hunger you build, that's built from when you were young. So that's the blessing of that. If you didn't have a lot, and your life was a struggle growing up, well, you're going to have something that people from privilege won't have. You're going to have a fire that they haven't been able to work on, and that's a gift in itself. And use that to your advantage in a good way, to build something, to go to school, to do whatever you're meant to do, whatever you feel you're meant to do.
Yes.
Feel like I went off on a different track with that, Michael. I don't know.
No, man, it was good. I'm not going to jump in on that stuff. That's awesome though, because that resilience, that's what it builds, right? And you read that, you see that in so many of those entrepreneurs that make it to that like high echelon level. Every one of them has a crazy story of selling their stuff out of a car, living in a car, doing wild stuff, right? Mortgaging their house and betting on themselves that they were going to do this and make it right. So, um, I that's awesome, man. That's a great way to put it. And with that being said, the help, right? And reaching out for help and accepting help. I know in your book that that you received help from a family, and they did a lot for you. And I wanted to ask about that. Is like, how did that make you feel, or if you can recall, just at the time, like, were you embarrassed? Were you grateful? Were you happy? Ashamed? Like, um, and the only reason I ask all that is because so many men I see out there now are just they have such a hard time accepting help. Like, you don't accept help from
Yeah,
anything.
yeah. It's different when you're a kid because you don't have as much say. So I was a kid back then, but when you're a man, uh, your pride gets in the way, your ego, right? So it's a little different. So when I was a kid, I was, and even up into my teens, I was very ashamed of how I grew up. I was ashamed to be poor. I was ashamed to grow up on welfare. I was ashamed to not have a vehicle. I was ashamed to pawn our belongings. It was it was challenging, right? Because it was tough for me to be when I started to go to non-indigenous schools. It was tough for me to fit in with them because I didn't have what they had, right? And so that was where that my friend from South Africa, him and his family, they paid for my fees, soccer fees. They started to really empower me, invite me to their home. That was an act of kindness, right? And so we need to start doing that for each other. And that's why I say, if I see someone who has that hunger, I will try help them, but they have to show me it. And so I really feel that I showed Johan's dad that with being around him. He saw something in me too, just by being me around him. He saw that I wanted something, right? And he became a mentor in a way to me. And then there would be many mentors along the journey through sports who were non-indigenous who would see something in me and would empower me through words and through encouragement. And when you don't have a father figure to say that, that's a lot to you. That means a lot to you. And so that really gave me that extra push to keep trying and to keep moving forward. And um, I guess the more things that I would overcome throughout time, whether it be going to university, there was none of us went to university in the past, so that was like one big barrier. Going to play sports in college, no one was doing that at that time that I could relate to. That was another barrier. Um, finishing 2 degrees, that was unheard of for where I came from. Starting multiple brands in the future, all these different things, they compounded over time. And and now I look at it as a responsibility to try to use it for good, try to help. And a lot of right now, what I'm doing is I'm working with a lot of non-indigenous clients to I have to really be strict with them to how to work with us. Like that's like I really have to tell them, no, I don't butter it up. I say this is what you need to do because this is what's been happening. And I'm not afraid to talk about racism. I'm not afraid to talk about people who hide behind labels and so on, titles. And so I have a lot of those tough conversations that I was scared to have because I used to care what people think. I used to care what people thought of me back then. And I'm at a point now where I guess maturity is finally catching up, Michael, where I don't care in a healthy way what people think. I know that what I'm doing is trying to do right, and I try to follow that feeling. And if anyone disagrees, then they're in a way they're interfering with progression. They're interfering with healing the world, so to speak. And so I'm just trying to be the an ally to try to bring people together in a sense where our indigenous people were behind many years, literally 200 years we're behind indigenous people. When we look at it, where we were put onto reserves and we were secluded from the rest of society while everyone's growing, they're getting their land, their farmland and so on. We look at all those generations. You look back to when you first got that land, you'll see where it was taken from. When people look at that, and then now they see Indigenous peoples back then, and they weren't allowed to compete in the mainstream, weren't allowed to trade with other people. They were put onto that reserve. They weren't allowed to leave. They had a border patrol called the Indian agent that said they couldn't leave the reserve. Like, what kind of society is that when this whole society is growing, and then Indigenous people are not even allowed to practice their beliefs, and now they're taken from their home, going to residential schools. They're losing all their beliefs and values. Some of them lost their lives, and they're put back into the mainstream, and it creates a big disaster because they weren't taught their their sense of love and self-worth was taken from them. And this is a time where we weren't talking about this stuff. We weren't talking about mental health and wellness. We weren't talking about healing, therapy, and so on. That wasn't a thing back then. So these people are now put back into the reserves, back into the cities, and so on, and they cope through addiction, which leads to a lot of the other negative stuff that we're seeing now. And so we're trying to catch up. We're trying to catch up to society right now. We're trying to heal. We have a lot of work to do. And that to me is one of the most frustrating things with the work I do, is that people don't have a hard time seeing that. And I have to really lay it down on, this is what's happened up until this point. And I tell some survivor stories. I tell them what's happening, and there's a lot of tears oftentimes when I'm sharing that stuff. And I say, I'm not here to make you feel bad. I'm here to make you understand. And the only way to truly understand is you have to feel what they felt by me retelling their stories to you. As you're feeling that feeling, you use that feeling of empathy aligned with a new belief, and you go and change this world with that. You go build diverse companies. You go build inclusive companies, and so on. You work with our people. You take time to understand them. But you can't get there unless you do work through this stuff first. I said, if it hurts you, imagine what they went through. It's nothing what you're going through, I say.
Yeah, well, I want to talk. We can dig in a little more on that, because that's part of the reason I brought on these Indigenous speakers, right? Like yourself, John, and I got another couple guys coming up, which is going to be pretty awesome. And just to see that, mostly because of the Orange Shirt Day too. It's kind of around that time that I wanted to bring that up, because it's not like, I don't want to get into the too much of that, but at the same time, it's not just one day, right? We gotta make sure that everyone's on page and understanding where everyone's coming from. And I'm bringing on a lot of guys with success stories and overcoming, but there's so much more in the background, because I see it every day now with work as well, right? And the things I do, and that's what I'm really trying to bridge that gap and help communities understand how this all works and how this business side of things work now, right? And it's a work in progress for sure, but at the same time, I know and I understand it, and I get where they come from, so it's an easy for me to do that. But at the same time, there's so many people that don't, and then they throw their hands up in ignorance, and they get upset or get frustrated, right? And then it throws everything off, right? So thanks for touching on that. And you make a really good point too with a lot of the people that like they're empathetic to it, but they just don't even know where to start, right? Like a lot of people, like you say, probably your speaking rooms, you probably do leave a lot of people in tears, and then they want to do something, but they don't know what. Like, do you have a next step for people, even just to start baby steps on how to understand that a little
Well,
better?
usually what people say is they'll make an excuse of well, I don't know where to start. And most people would not switch places with us. We know that. And in order to really take that next step, is you should come visit our community. Well, what does that mean? They say. Well, for example, we have powwows. Why don't you come to them? Those are for anyone to come to. That's a social setting for anyone to come to. There is no discrimination. We're not allowed to push people away in any of our culture. So that's a segue. Go to them. Go talk to people. And then I tell people, go give tobacco to elders. Go talk to them while you're there. Go ask them questions. Always take tobacco everywhere you go, because that's a part of our belief system. So that's how you start. You go talk to us. You go start building friendships. You go out of your way, and instead of being afraid of us in public, go talk to us. Go make us feel included. Because right now all these towns that all across the prairies and whatnot, they're the ones that I find, in my opinion, only my opinion, Michael, that harbor a lot of the old school mentality that sometimes where there's racism still stuck. And that's to me where we need to do the most work. So what does that mean? It means we have to make this a priority. And it's not just me, it's all of us that have to do it. Our businesses, our towns, our municipalities, we all have to make it a priority. Because the old school way is not going to work in the mainstream. You know what's going to happen? It's going to flip back on us. What's happened is I gave you an example of how indigenous people were put while the rest of society was developing. That's going to happen to us as a as municipalities, as towns. These cities that are more inclusive and diverse are going to grow much effective than more effective than us. And the populations that don't like it where they're living, they'll go there. They're going to leave. And those towns, those municipalities are going to, in a way, implode because they're not going to be able to sustain themselves as the new world is developing, so to speak. So that's what I see. I could be wrong. I may have some truth to that. But the future is multicultural and diverse. We have to all be included for all of us to be successful.
Absolutely. And yeah, I see that already. There's a lot of, even in Saskatchewan, there's a lot of RMs that are slowly starting to close their doors. And
Yeah. And
it's
their children are not wanting to be succession planning to they're not, they want to go do stuff in the city. They want to move to the city. They don't want to stay there. So who's going to be coming and buying this farmland? I'm going to let you fill in that blank because I think you already know what I'm talking about. It's going to be other people. So that's what I'm saying, Michael. We have to start. Otherwise, we're just creating our own like it's going to happen regardless whether we like it or not. And we might as well start now.
that's such a good point. There's tons there. Absolutely, man. There's a few other things I wanted to touch on, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit. But you did talk about with sports and collegiate, right? Like you played you could volleyball in college. With with that, how have you been keeping up with fitness? How you been? I know you're traveling a lot. You're all over the place. Do you have any routines to help keep guys on track, or at least yourself keep yourself on track?
Well, the routine is for me is that I know that I'm going to be the days aren't always going to be the same because when you're in the middle of airports and going to another engagement, sometimes there's delays, right? There's things. So I always, when I'm traveling, I have a routine where I try to do body weight exercises right when I get to the hotel room, right? And so that's my routine when I'm traveling because not every place is going to have a gym, not every place is going to be able to run. When I'm home, I try to go for runs. I try to go for a jog. I try to do um, uh, lightweight exercises and so on, just to try to keep my body agile. Because that's my, I really want to, be able to keep my body agile. That's my focus. Um, and so, but again, as time progresses, that may change. I may choose to do something different. I may choose to go, more hardcore with something else. That's more, could be weights. It could be, anything. But it always changes based on where you want to go. The hard part is people don't know where they want to go. So I would pick something of where you want to go in terms of a goal and align everything you need to do to get there. So for me, I said I wanted to become a speaker. Well, okay, what do I need to do to become a speaker? I've learned this stuff. I went to go find the people to learn from. What about my body? Well, I better make sure I can walk around that stage in a healthy way. So that means I have to look after myself. That means I have to, go for jogs, do running, go for walks. I have to work out, and so that's become a part of my life. And I could probably improve upon that. But again, no 2 days are the same for me. Some days I'm just slammed with meetings. I'm tired at the end of the day. Some days it's just a couple meetings, and it's always different. And some days I'm traveling, so it's knowing you and working with the best way you can with yourself. Don't try to be like other people. Do what works for you and what you can see yourself doing. If it's going for a walk, that's lots. Go for a long walk if you can. I get my best ideas when I'm walking. I'll just be walking, and all of a sudden, boom, something will come. I'll write it down. I'll record myself, and I go and implement it later. So do what works for you. That's what I would recommend.
That's great, man, and that's super smart too with the with the just train for what you're doing as well, right? A lot of people train to want to be a bodybuilder or something, but most people never. It's such a grind. You don't want to go down that road, or most people can't go down that road or wouldn't want to once they realize what's involved with that. But absolutely, if you're speaking, jog, keep your breath up, make sure you're able to talk and be able to have the stamina for an hour to talk like that, right? Or if you're hunting out there hunting, make sure you can walk or trek and do those things. So training for what you're doing is an awesome way to do it. Um, Another thing, kind of along those lines as well, is men's work, because that's really the world I'm in. Obviously, relationships and men's work, and mental health. When I say that, like, what's that mean to you, or what do you hear when I say men's work?
Um, to me, it's revisiting it from what people used to think it was. It's a different. To me, it's evolved in, you have to have a balance of not just the masculinity, but you also have to have the empathy towards a woman, to understanding a female, their emotions and whatnot. Um, I grew up around women my entire life. I grew up with my grandma, my mom, my siblings were all females. I was the only male in the household for many years. I had very few male cousins. So growing up, I was immersed in their world. What they talked about, how their emotions played an important part to their well being and so on. And when I became older, I started to have more male friends. Now I started to what they were taught I would learn. And so as time progressed and I started to become my own person, I realized that there was a lot of things that I would learn from that they weren't exactly healthy. They weren't the best things to build a long-term relationship with your spouse, whoever you're meant to live with, to raise children. You have to almost unlearn a lot of things and bring in a different way of doing things for yourself that are healthy. So, you know, um, there's a lot of stuff I had to improve on there, Michael. There's so many I can't even so many things. Like a lot of things I didn't have, and I had to act as if I knew what that person was on the go. So instead of making excuses of, oh yeah, I didn't have dad to show me that. Oh, my dad was never there to show me that. Instead of making excuses, you have to change that to, well, okay, that didn't happen. Well, act as if. What does that mean? If you did know, what would it mean? Like, what would you do if you did know? Just because you didn't have that parent, why don't you try to become the parent you wish you had? Why don't you become that loving husband that you wish you would have seen in your household, right? So all those things, I would just flip it into, okay, well, I'll become that person. I'll just try. I'll do what I can. So I'd like to say that I'm doing that right now in the best way that I can with my wife and my children, um, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of blessed days and mornings and evenings and whatnot. And I like to say that I try to help people do the same thing, where don't use what your lack of whatever as an excuse to being successful, to trying to do things in a good way, to become a good person, to become a good male, and so on. It's because you didn't have some doesn't mean that you can't become that person that your kids are proud of, that your family's proud of. So hope
No,
that helps.
it's and I again, there's no better feeling than being that for your kids, right? Like, I know myself, I can see it from the outside when I'm really engaged with my kids or having fun and teaching them things, and it's just, there's no better feeling in the world, right? And I know myself too when I'm being a shitty dad, and not as present with them, and I don't, it makes me feel even worse, right? So like, why would I put myself through that, and why do most men put themselves through that? I don't know, but it's so much, it's easier to be that man, to be that good dad, I find, um and getting to see that in your kids. So with that being said, like, I'm so big with boys. Like, I got two sons. I don't have a daughter, right? So I got two sons, and I'm really big on raising these boys to have, be protectors, be providers, um, be problem solvers, but at the same time now seeing the empathy, seeing the loving, seeing the caring side of that as well. Um, What with that being said too, I know you have a daughter. What's it like for you raising a daughter? Because like I say, I'm always intrigued by that. I always ask guys that question.
It's different when you have a daughter because it's another level of protection you have to think about for her, and also um, you have to try to show her that you don't always have to depend on a male person for your success to be loved. So with Rachel, my wife, we try. Well, she does a better job at this, where she points out her positive characteristics about her as a young girl, and um, because one of the things that unfortunately we see sometimes is that some, if you know, especially when there's not a male or a dad leaves from a relationship with there's female children, you know, that parent, that dad might be really close to that daughter, their daughter, but all of a sudden they're not there no more. So that daughter may grow up to have a sense of it might be her problem, why her fault, she might be thinking why her dad left. So she may get into unhealthy relationships when she becomes older because of that lack that's always there in her mind. So to me, as I'm raising my daughter, I'm trying to show her how to be independent, that she doesn't need anyone to provide for her. If it works out for her in the future, then awesome. But to be able to look after herself, to be independent, to have um, that confidence to step out into her own path and not have to worry about trying to uh, that she needs someone to do that for her, so to speak. That she can do all that she can and more than a male counterpart, so on. That you know, I tell people this all the time when I'm speaking. I say, you know what, I really feel that females are going to be the ones to heal this world. The more leaders that we get that are female, they're going to come in and balance us out in some way. I really feel that, and so I really, you know, I'm trying to my best to try to work with my daughter to become her own leader, whatever that means for her, and to try to continue having a voice. She's much opposite than me and my son. Me and my son are very the same. We're introverts. We're quiet in person, and my girl's, you know, the extrovert in her family. She's the life of the party, if you will. You know, she has that bubbly personality, and that's good. You know, and so we try to nurture that to make people around her feel good about themselves and to compliment people in a good way. You know, so yeah, there's lots to that, but you know, in a sense, we're just trying to use people and their gifts and how they're blessed to be here as human beings and to make this world better.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And I know a lot of dads talk about making sure that they're example as well, right? Making sure that they, if they are around, making sure they're example in the house of how to treat a woman, how they treat their mother, and making sure that they don't, they definitely don't settle. These girls don't settle for anything less, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and there's a lot of that where we try to model it through our behavior as a couple, um, showing what a, you know, try to show what a healthy conversation looks like between us, and they're, you know, they're always watching us, so they watch all the stuff that you talk about, what even if you're having a disagreement on something, they'll see how you resolve that. So we always have to be conscious of how we do things around our children, how we talk, how we behave, and so on, because they're going to pick up on those habits unconsciously. They'll see them.
Absolutely. Well, man, I think that's a great way to wrap this up. Thank you. I know we touched on a lot of stuff, and it's pretty awesome hearing from you and in your point of view. But if anyone else wants to find information, where can they find you?
You can go to kendalnetmaker.com, Kendal with one L, and all my stuff's on there. You can see about there if you're looking for a speaker for your next event, or you're looking for some books, niche gear, all that type of stuff. You can go to our website.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, man. I really appreciate this, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Michael.